No, I'm going to Berlin on Friday.
Because you need to be available.
What's it?
What is today?
Today is
Are you staying then tomorrow here?
I'm staying here tomorrow.
What year's this? I'm sorry. What year's
Very curious.
It's a whole new world.
Yes, anyway, so you'll be around.
Yeah, I'm
going
around.
to be around tomorrow and Thursday.
You're heading back?
Somewhere there, yeah. I don't know what you're doing, but I haven't talked to you. Just incredible.
Shall we stand up to talk or sit down?
I don't think so.
Okay, welcome everybody. Benvenuti a tutti. Siamo qui dell'organizzazione SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, che è un'organizzazione per sopravvissuti di abusi sessuali da preti nella Chiesa Cattolica, e l'organizzazione per i diritti umani CCR, Center for Constitutional Rights a New York.
I'm 20 years old. I was raped at He's still currently serving as a priest in India, and last known overseeing 40 schools.
My name is Philip Saviano. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. When I was ages 11 and 12, I was sexually assaulted repeatedly by my parish priest, whose name was Father David Hawley. I kept this childhood experience a secret until 1992, when I was age 40. I went public then, told my story through the news media. I also filed a lawsuit to get access to the priest's personnel file. I was dismayed to discover that over the course of a 30-year career, this priest had molested dozens of children in 4 different states, and that at least 6 bishops knew that he was a child molester. Yet not one bishop ever removed him from the priesthood, not one bishop ever reported him to civil authorities. This priest ruined my childhood. And that's why I'm here today, because I want to protect other children, prevent them from having to go through similar experiences and having to live with painful childhood memories for most of their life, as I have. I also feel very strongly that top Vatican officials should be investigated and held accountable for concealing crimes against children, for protecting child molesters, and for continuing to put other children at risk.
My name is Rita Mia from Los Angeles, California. It's MILLA. At the age of 16, I was sexually assaulted by a priest who later invited the other priest to abuse me and to rape me. I was raped by 7 priests, and it continued to become pregnant. I told the Archdiocese of Los Angeles what had happened, and they refused to punish the priest. And later on, they moved the priest to the Philippines, knowing that they were rapists. Thank you.
My name is Peter Isley, I-S-E-L-Y, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was sexually assaulted and raped for several years by Father Gail Leifeld, a Capuchin Franciscan priest in Wisconsin when I was a child. There are dozens of victims of Father Leifeld. Several bishops and his provincials knew that he was a danger and a risk to children. And I'm here today, having many of us here gone to Spain and Poland and France and Amsterdam and Brussels and so many places over the last several weeks to express really our profound and deep gratitude to the survivors of Europe, but especially today to the survivors of Italy. Over the last year in Rome and Venice and Genoa and in Malta, we are beginning to see historic changes with priests being arrested and convicted for these crimes. And so, although we've been in all these different countries as victims of these crimes, we are our own country. And all week we have heard the same continuous voice of exile, of the diaspora, of victims from all over our church, forming a pillar of strength and memory and witness and testimony that is making this world safer for children.
My name is Barbara Blaine. I was sexually raped and assaulted by my parish priest beginning at age 12 to 13. I didn't know it was abuse and thought it was my fault. As an adult, I needed healing, had gone to the church officials, but they really did not help me. So I began looking for other victims to find help and healing. And for 23 years, we have worked together to help ourselves heal and to try to protect other children. We have not succeeded in stopping these sex crimes in the Catholic Church, and we didn't know what else to do. So we investigated whether we could go to the International Criminal Court, and we asked the Center for Constitutional Rights to work with us. We are not asking for an investigation into the Catholic Church. We do not want indictments of the Catholic religion or the Catholic faith. We merely are asking for an investigation of church officials who are endangering children and committing these crimes against humanity.
My name is Pam Spies, and I'm a senior staff attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. And I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice, so I will try to speak loudly. It's been, as you know, we filed the complaint in The Hague on last Tuesday, a week ago, and it's been a really amazing and eye-opening week since then. As Peter Isley said, we've been traveling to different cities and meeting with survivors of sexual abuse everywhere we go. And as we know, the patterns are all very similar. And you know, one of the accusations that has come out, and we expected it, was that this was a stunt. And we knew that in going into this is something we've been working on for over a year. And we've been very careful with it. We've looked at lots of evidence, and we've done our own legal analysis, and we've also consulted with other experts in the field of international criminal law. And we went much further than one would normally go in submitting this type of complaint to the ICC prosecutor. We did a legal analysis, we presented facts, and we presented evidence and documentation. As you may have heard, we submitted 10,000 pages in hard copy format and another 12,000 electronically. And these pages chronicle findings from different commissions and grand juries that have looked at these issues and done very comprehensive inquiries. And all of them reach essentially the same conclusions, that there is cover-up and that there are policies and practices that are used from one diocese to the next, whether it's in Ireland or in the U.S., Belgium, Austria, Canada. The patterns and practices, the pre-shifting, destruction of documents, protecting those who help conceal the secret, but punishing whistleblowers. These things are occurring all over the place, and it's very clear when one looks at the documentation that we've presented. I think, given the time and going carefully through it, you will arrive at the same conclusion that these policies and practices emerge from Rome. And so we have, presented this as under the theory of superior liability. And also we've named these persons of interest because of their particular role that they played in very specific cases, which enabled the abuse to continue. And I want to make one thing very clear, that it's not just a matter of keeping it quiet. They've kept it going. And so we talk about cover-ups, but it goes beyond cover-ups. It goes to actually creating the conditions that enable these things to continue and that expose more children and vulnerable adults to the risk of sexual violence. And in fact, that has been the case over and over. I also want to make another thing very clear. We've been able to watch over the past week how the discussions have played out, and we've, by and large, been very happy with the response and the ways in which people are taking this very seriously. Analysts on both sides of this debate that has ensued acknowledge that this is a serious effort. And then there are discussions about whether or not this fits the jurisdiction of the ICC. And we've heard from One Vatican LA this week, or last week, I'm sorry, that it's not going to go anywhere. And I want to make it very clear that whether or not that is true, that may very well turn out to be the case, but it will not be because the ICC does not have jurisdiction. And I want to make that very clear, and I'm willing to answer questions about that, after everyone's made their presentations. One other point I want to make is that what we have presented to the court really lays the foundation for understanding this dynamic in the church. And again, it's not the church that we are alleging; it is the individuals within it. But that this dynamic fosters a widespread and systematic occurrence of rape and sexual violence against kids and vulnerable adults. And we have laid the foundation, and we hope, and in fact we now have reason to believe that others will be coming in with their own cases that will, because that foundation is there, they will be coming in with cases that the court can then look at with all of the evidence of the widespread and systematic policies and practices that allow this to continue already there. One of the issues that has come up over the past week is the issue of jurisdiction, and some have said that much of what we've presented predates the treaty's entry into force, or occurs in places where the court doesn't have jurisdiction because, for instance, the U.S. has not ratified the Rome Statute. We've made it very clear that all of that material that we've submitted goes to establish what the prosecutor needs to establish, that these are widespread and systematic. That it's not, we're not saying that each and every one of these cases is something the prosecutor has jurisdiction over. What we're saying is this is the evidence you need to establish that these are not isolated incidents happening in different countries, that they're part of this widespread or systematic basis. So, that's what I mean by laying the foundation, and we hope that others can come in and join. And the last thing I want to say is that it's the survivors network of those abused by priests who brought this case. And we talk about survivors, and we use that term. But it's important to remember and I think it's especially important because these crimes tend to be minimized when we talk about abuse. We're talking about rape and sexual violence and the brutality of an institution that ignores it, that subjects people to it, and then turns its back on the victims. And there are many who have not survived these experiences. And one of the things we have presented in this complaint that is available on the internet at ccrjustice.org, along with the 22,000 pages of documentation, is the accounts of different cases where suicides have been attributed and linked to the abuse people suffered. And I think that's important to remember when we talk and think about the level of gravity involved in these types of crimes and the magnitude of these crimes. Thank you.
My name is Vincent Warren. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. the law office that brought this case. And as Pam mentioned, this is a very serious endeavor, something that we've worked on for a long time. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's important for the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to have this evidence. This is not about politics. This is about facts and the law. And as Pam pointed out, that the law is very clear on what's required, and the evidence that we've submitted is also very clear that it establishes the proper threshold for the ICC to investigate. But we're also here in Rome, after going to so many cities, to make a plea, a special plea, to people who work in churches. And what we are asking for is for the people that work in churches, the church workers, other church officials, to look in your hearts, to look at the people that are here today, some of the bravest people that I've ever met that have spoken out about the abuse that they've suffered, the thousands of people that we don't know about that have not been able to come forward because they haven't been supported or they didn't know that they could, that the people in the church need to look in their hearts and they need to take the evidence and the information that they have about clergy abuse, about rape and about sexual violence, and they need to submit that to the prosecutor at the ICC. It's very important that the information come out, that the information not stay as hidden as the processes that the church officials use to victimize people every day. We also want to make it clear that for the survivors, for the people who have gone through experiences like my colleagues here from SNAP, that you are not in this alone, that we want you, please, to come out, contact SNAP at snapnetwork.org, join the group of survivors who are supporting each other, who are trying to take this battle, move it forward, who are not taking no for an answer, who do not believe the lies of the church, do not believe the deceit, and who are looking for justice and looking for accountability in one of the largest and most important courts that the world has, the International Criminal Court. We would like you, please, to find the courage to come forward. If you're a victim, we would like you, please, to come forward and find the courage to come forward if you're a church worker that has information that the ICC prosecutor needs in order to evaluate whether they should investigate.
Grazie. Thank you, everybody. I have a favor to ask. One, does anyone have an extra English press kit? They're all gone. Okay. We'll email you. Two, could anyone who needs, and you translate this, needs things translated, ask questions first? Because Liva needs to go and do an interview, and so she's available first. So then questions in English can come after.
Se qualcuno ha delle domande da fare in italiano posso tradurre io, ma quelle che devono fare una domanda che le facciano prima perché devo uscire tra poco. C'è qualcuno che non lo può fare in inglese? Okay. Fine. Okay.
Okay, English questions.
Okay, Paddy Agnew, Irish Times. The big question of what we do is the jurisdiction. It seems to me a lot of people in this room will sympathy for you people, but to go to the International Criminal Court and to say to them that the Vatican and Vatican officials are responsible, you're drawing up a scenario whereby, you know, Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II one morning, sort of over the breakfast table, got a few of the cardinals together and said, right lads, let's go out and rape a lot of children. Because if they didn't do that, I don't see how you can say that they are organisationally responsible for it.
There are two ways that they are responsible, and one is the doctrine of superior liability. In military terms, it's called command responsibility. Superior responsibility is the civilian counterpart. And under that theory of liability, a superior can be held responsible for the acts of his subordinates if he knew or had reason to know that these crimes were being committed or about to be committed and failed to prevent them and failed to punish them after they occurred, and if they failed to turn the matter over to civil authorities. In that case, it's very clear what the church policy is. We're talking about one of the most streamlined, hierarchical organizations in the world. There is no middle management. And the Pope is the supreme leader, and the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith implements that policy. And the policy has been one of secrecy. Even the process that the Vatican says it has to adjudicate these issues within its own confines is not. It's biased toward the alleged offender. It does not take them out, put them out of harm's way to children. There is no traditionally there is no real punishment other than sentencing to someone to prayer or penance. That's most often the punishment. And so that combined with all of the policies and practices you see at work in the different dioceses around the world really shows quite clearly that this policy is emerging from the Vatican. And it's not, in any of the cases you've cited of command responsibility, these are not people necessarily who ordered individual offenses, but they had a larger plan or policy, and these incidents were taking place within that and to further that. And if the plan or policy is to protect the church at all costs, at the cost of children's lives, then that's what we're talking about. But the key part here is their role as superiors. But we've also suggested that, and analyzed this carefully, that there is also responsibility directly for some of these persons that we've named for the role that they have played in particular cases where they have delayed removing priests, even after bishops have asked them over and over again and warned them about the danger.
Four people,
Yes.
the two cardinals that says
Yes, and Pope Benedict as Cardinal Ratzinger as head of the CDF, taking actions, making decisions about individual cases which left the perpetrators where they were to harm further kids further. I don't know if that answers your question.
But just to get it clear, you're saying you're trying to hold Vatican responsible in terms of failure to prevent, failure to punish, and failure to report to civil authorities.
Yes.
But I mean, failure to prevent it seems very difficult to argue.
It's.
How are you going to know what way your priests are ever going to behave?
Well, you know, because you've had notice as of the 1950s about the propensity of sex offenders in the church to reoffend. There is communications going from the Order of the Paracletes in the U.S., which was the treatment center where many of these people were sent, warnings to the popes, even to two different popes, about these problems. That person who was head of the Paracletes was removed. And then you see, it's not difficult to prove because of these individual cases I'm telling you about. When you have someone like Father Teta in Arizona, where the bishop is constantly writing to Cardinal Ratzinger and telling him, let us get rid of this person. He's a danger to children. And by the way, Cardinal Ratzinger was notified by letter that they considered his rituals of abuse almost satanic-like. This is the type of offense we're talking about. And he had notice of that and then left that person where he was being paid by the diocese for several more years. So that's notice. You have notice in some of these cases, but you have overall notice and policy which allows these things to happen. And the thing I didn't say earlier is that in addition to all of the documentation we've provided, which establishes widespread and systematic, that it is widespread and it is also systematic. It doesn't have to be both for the court, but it's both. We presented 5 new complaints, 3 of which are of survivors who are proceeding confidentially, 2 of whom are minors. Megan's case we've submitted as well. There was notice to the CDF, and Cardinal Levada has been involved in the back and forth between the dioceses. And we've presented a fifth case, that's right, a fifth case, where the offense actually occurred prior to 2002, but the perpetrator is still in ministry, and the Belgian diocese had notice. We believe that should be approached as a continuing violation. So we didn't just leave it as here's everything that's happened and here's the groundwork. We also gave new cases post-2002.
Yes.
I'm Frank Rocker for Religion News Service. So just to ask for the exception in this case, over the last decade, more than a decade, the two popes have responded in various ways, and there have been various initiatives, and the Vatican's having a conference in February, and it's issued new guidelines, and the Pope has apologized and so forth. Has there been any improvement? I mean, has the Vatican done anything right in the last 10 years or 12 years? Is there any progress, or is this all just a show to cover up their obstinate obstruction, or however you would characterize it?
Well, I don't want to monopolize the stage, but I can speak to that briefly as far as how we address that in the complaint. I think the Cloyne report out of Ireland shows quite clearly this is a inquiry that was taking place and looking at the situation post-reforms in Ireland, and found that they did not really have a bearing, that there was not the kind of cooperation with civil authorities that there should have been. Priests were left, credibly accused priests were left in ministry. And we see the same thing in Philadelphia, when a third grand jury was seated and issued its report this year, again, post-reforms in the U.S. and post-zero tolerance policy. And that grand jury found that there were 37 credibly accused priests still in ministry. And so the same things were happening behind the reforms. So I'll say that as far as how we addressed it in the complaint, but maybe someone else wants to speak to that more broadly.
I would like to say that, look, the bottom line is that if Pope Benedict was serious about protecting children, number one, he would start punishing the bishops who have transferred predator priests. He would demand that all predator priests be removed from ministry immediately. He would demand that any religious community or diocese who is harboring a fugitive priest who has been indicted in one country and is hiding out and even working in ministry in another country, that stop immediately. And that those who have been indicted in one country should be returned to that country and face their charges, or at least not supported by Catholic Church institutions and religious communities while these charges are still pending. Those types of responses by the Pope would give us some indication that he is serious about protecting children. But if a predator is thinking today, oh, I see that 13-year-old and he looks very attractive, I believe if he thinks, well, what will happen if I get caught, if I were to rape this child? I believe what he thinks is that, oh, well, I guess I will have to live my life in a retreat center where I will live and have all of my needs met. I'll receive a salary, 3 meals a day, even have housekeepers and someone to do my laundry. And I won't be turned over to the police. So why wouldn't the predator abuse again?
And I think to get to your point, the priesthood has, under these practices and policies, right, has become, it is in many ways the most dangerous occupation for children in the world. Why? Because it's the only occupation in civil society, working with children, in which you can rape and molest a child and remain employed in that occupation with institutional authority over children.
Sorry, I did not understand if here in Italy you are going to go directly to the different churches to deliver your message to, as you said, to the church responsible, or if your message is delivered to us, through the media.
I think the message is going to be delivered through you. I don't think we have plans to go to each individual through you. Okay. So yes, so any information that gets out through the media that reaches church workers and reaches victims would be very helpful.
About the numbers you have, do you have some estimations of about victims in Italy?
I don't. Do you have any information particularly on that question?
There are definitely thousands of victims in Italy.
Yeah.
There are many who have spoken out, different organizations over Italy. There's the Institute of Provolo in Verona, where so many victims have told about their abuse. There's victims in Savona, like Francesco Gianardi, who's here, and he knows many others. There are so many people in this country who are suffering in silence. So, like there are in many other countries. And we have been flooded with emails from survivors from all different countries.
When we were here a year and a half ago with the Father Murphy case at the deaf school in Wisconsin, we were told, you'll never see a priest convicted in Italy, ever. Never. It's never, ever going to happen. It's not going to happen. And we're seeing it happen. It is happening at a very rapid speed, sort of historically, if you look at it. And we cannot say, as fellow survivors, enough about the courage of the Italian survivors who are coming to prosecutors, who are coming forward. These are our brothers and sisters. They're in many ways the most important community of survivors on this issue in the world. It is an absolute honor and privilege to meet every single one of them. Like I said, we belong to a single country. Doesn't matter what country we come from. We are the country that the church, unfortunately, has dispossessed, has raped, has thrown away. And every time I've looked into, we've met with priests that are survivors during this trip, victims who are priests, who are terrified to come forward. And it doesn't matter whether they're clergy, obviously. We're all the same. And so these Italian survivors are going to lead the way. I don't think we have any question about this. And this process is going to continue. We've already started this process this week. It's already underway. Change is already underway. Children are safer this week because of what we are attempting to do as survivors with our friends and colleagues in the legal international community. They are safer this week than they were last week. And if we continue this, they're going to be safer next week than this week. And that's all that matters to every single person sitting here. How are we going to stop the next rape of a child? That's all that matters to us. And anyone that's willing to join us, as he's mentioned, there are people that have information about this. And now there's another place to go besides to the bishop or to the Vatican, and that's to the international court. There's people that could really help us out, and we're appealing to them as victims who were raped in churches. Please, we are begging you, if you have information, if you're working in the Vatican, if you're a cardinal, there are ways to get the information now to someone that can make a difference. And that's what we're here for, to make a difference.
The other thing is that we believe that if Jesus were walking on our earth today, we believe Jesus would be standing with the victims and with the children, and he would demand the reforms that we seek, that put the primacy of the welfare of children first.
Any more questions?
Yeah, it's fair to say that the whole thrust of the petition that you've filed with the ICC is episcopal responsibility. You're not concerned anymore about the actual priests who've done the thing. You're concerned really about how their bishops covered up for them.
There's two pieces, and one is obviously we're concerned about the priests who do commit these offenses. But the problem is, and what makes, we've been asked why these officials in the Catholic Church, and not why aren't we talking about other religions? And one of the reasons, the main reason is that no other religion considers itself a state. No other religion has the streamlined global presence with the hierarchy that the church does, and bishops looking to Rome for their directions and how to handle these issues. So it's both. Without changing that institutional culture and bringing accountability to it, the sexual violence is not going to stop. I think what you see when you read the complaint and you read the documents attached to it, it has become a culture of sexual violence. And it condones it, has traditionally condoned it, accepted it, and in effect perpetuated it.
You had one more.
If the Vatican isn't a signatory to the Rome Treaty, what effect does any sanctions that the ICC would say they took on the case?
Whether the Vatican is a state or not is not significant for these purposes. The court has jurisdiction over people who are nationals of countries that have ratified the Rome Statute, and the persons we've named are nationals of countries that have ratified. They've not given up their citizenship. The other way the court has jurisdiction is if the crimes occur on the territory of countries that have ratified the ICC, and given the Church's virtually global presence, that standard is met too.
He had a question.
Pam, you said before something that said that there's no middle management, there's a lack of middle management, which is a justification or the venue for the jurisdiction of the ICC. Those of us who know the Vatican would totally disagree that there's a lot of middle management when it comes to congregation and various offices that deal with various things. So I don't know whether that is going to affect your case or not, and whether you can talk a little bit about that, because it seems to be the jurisdiction, even Time magazine had something out which spoke about what you guys did and spoke to some lawyers basically saying that there's a jurisdiction problem here.
Well, and sure.
Okay, why don't you? I'm going to have a question for Peter as well.
Sure. Right. Well, it doesn't have the thick layer of middle management, I should say. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, I suppose we could call it middle management, which is why we've named Cardinal Levada, and it's why we think Pope Benedict, as Cardinal Ratzinger, also has liability when he was head of the congregation. But that's where we are, right? We're talking about the people at that level, the congregation, which is tasked with the responsibility for handling allegations of sexual violence, and Cardinal Sodano, who was Secretary of State for a while and had also played a direct role in especially one of the cases we highlight in the complaint, that of Marcial Maciel. And then Bertone, who is now Secretary of State and had worked under Ratzinger as head of the CDF. What I would say to the analysts who are discussing this in the media right now, we have set out a very detailed complaint where we have addressed these issues. And what happens a lot is that people react off the cuff when they get the call or see something like this. And we're encouraging people to take their time and read through this, because just the question you asked, the fact that the Vatican is a state, considers itself a state, should have any bearing. It has no bearing. The most significant feature of the International Criminal Court is that it removed all immunities that would have previously served as barriers to accountability for these types of mass crimes. It removed head of state immunities, official acts immunities, diplomatic immunities. None of that stuff applies. And so, the fact that the Vatican hasn't ratified doesn't mean you end there, because the court has jurisdiction in other ways, like, as I said, through nationality of the accused and through the territorial jurisdiction in terms of where these crimes happened.
Of course, know that the Pope, the other two people, depends on what they do. The Pope has lost his German citizenship forever until he dies, unless he resigns, goes back to Germany, and teaches theology. So in that case, he is no longer a German and will not be. Germany say he's lost his because he's a Vatican citizen. He's a monarch. He is not technically, he is literally a monarch. The other two also have Vatican citizenship right now, as long as they're working in the Vatican.
But they also have their original citizenship. They have not renounced that.
Yeah, they haven't renounced it. The Pope has. The Pope is no longer a German.
Well, we would differ in the analysis of that. So,
Peter, getting back to before about, I find your appeal interesting, but why did you limit it to Vatican employees, the kind of people who dealt with these cases and saw these pieces of paper passing under their eyes, would be, in the opinion of SNAP and other organizations, part of the problem and not the solution, maybe part of even the cover. Because as you know, CDF is a handful of people. There always plenty of, very few people cases. So would you not have sort of wanted to sort of make this appeal to people working in churches around the world?
Well, I certainly, and I've got a lot of jet lag, so maybe. Thank you for correcting my. Absolutely, every we're always talking about two crimes here: the rape and the molestation, and the cover-up. It's always two crimes. That's what has to be addressed. So, I mean, we're here in Rome, the parishes and churches here in Rome and in Italy, but specifically, of course, I wanted to make this appeal to anybody in the Vatican. And obviously, all this information is being centralized here. They have announced, they have said for years, we have, like right now, over 4,000 cases. They're gathering criminal evidence around the world, like a separate justice system, sending it here, and then openly telling the world we have like at least over 4,000 cases of pedophile priests. Now, what are they doing with this information? What are they doing with it? Are they handing it over to law enforcement? No. They're doing whatever they think they should do with it, and that is simply unacceptable. Who else would be allowed to announce this? And everyone just sort of shrugs their shoulders. Well, it's not okay. There has to be a collection point for this criminal evidence besides that being gathered by bishops and cardinals and monsignors around the world. It's absolutely unacceptable, and that's why this complaint is perfectly reasonable.
And hang on, Peter, are you saying as well, Barbara, that you don't believe the Vatican now when they say, as they do with every document about sexual abuse, that the priests should, bishops should cooperate with civil authorities?
Well,
you say that all the time. You're saying you don't believe it?
Well, that's not actually what they're saying. It's always cooperate with civil authorities if the circumstances warrant it.
Yeah.
There's always an exemption. They do not have an order, a policy. You have to turn over all evidence and information of sexual crimes against children to your law enforcement in your local community, and you do it now. They do not have a zero-tolerance policy around the world. The Pope, with a single stroke of the pen, could make this a world so safe for children in this church. With a stroke of his pen, that's all he needs to do. No one that has assaulted a child is going to be a priest. That is not an unreasonable request. That is what occupations in civil society have been doing for decades. They're not above everybody's standard here. They're below everybody's standard. There is there's no one's getting together saying at the Vatican, we've never said this, that there's an official policy to rape and molest children. None of us ever in 20 years have ever said that. But there is an official policy to cover it up. That's the problem. Or to tolerate it being covered up.
And well, I was just going to add to that when you talk about these instructions to bishops to cooperate, it's always couched in terms of consistent with canon law, or which mandates secrecy, and even from the very first oath taken requires that the concern for the overall good of the church be taken into account, and that is the piece that has allowed this process to continue for so long, because that is the sort of canon law basis for non-cooperation. So even if that, with the stroke of that pen, there still needs to be an additional layer of accountability. And Peter talked about two crimes always, and I would say that that's what makes the harm in these particular cases so egregious, because there are multiple layers of harm. There's what first happens when a child especially is assaulted by a trusted adult and an authority figure, and in this case, somebody that they are taught to look up to and revere. And there's the second layer of harm, which comes with the response from the church when if it gets reported, they're ignored, they're sworn to secrecy, and sometimes, and as we've documented in this complaint, blamed and discredited. So that's when you take that along with the isolation and alienation that comes around after this, the harm is so severe, and that's why we're really making a point of pointing to and trying to surface the experiences of those who chose another way out, and the suicides that are linked to the abuse in different countries.
Before we move on, I just wanted to address what we're asking for, a question from churches, just so everybody is clear. If a security guard or a secretary from any church, any place in the world, has information and evidence, we are asking all of those church workers to please send that information to the ICC prosecutor. This is about collecting all of the available information for the prosecutor to be able to review. That's what we're asking for.
The thing I was going to say is that we as victims have been meeting with each other in confidential self-help support group meetings. We've been doing it for 23 years, but what we continually still keep happening is that when we share with each other what happens when we go to the church officials, what we're hearing still is that my bishop says the exact same thing that this bishop says and that bishop says, and it becomes clear to us as victims that these church officials are all following one policy. And the policy still to this day keeps secrecy is the primary concern. Go ahead, please.
Megan, if I'm really bad at math, but you're only 21, and it makes your particular case in a sense because the meltdown in Boston was in 2001, if I'm not mistaken.
2002.
2002. So, if what SNAP and other organizations had been demanding had been done, if the Vatican had put its foot down in 2002, what happened to you should have never happened. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, the others are older than you are. I think that's fair.
Very.
Not much.
Oh.
Be kind over there.
So, some of us have children her age.
But most of you see what I'm saying? I mean, do you feel particularly angry about that?
It saddens me, and it saddens me that, you know, I'm sitting here still today, and my perpetrator still has the opportunity every day to rape more children, and that the church hasn't changed and hasn't made a zero tolerance policy to stop abuse, and that, you know, when I contacted them, I was 15 and still being raped by this priest, and they hung up the phone on me. If this policy would have been set in place, they would have did the right thing. And, yeah, okay. Sorry.
Well, talk about how you feel about the fact that there's an indictment out. Talk about that. Explain that, okay?
Okay. It's upsetting at the same time, too, with them letting him be in active ministry still, when the state of Minnesota has an indictment out on him, and he should be here facing charges. And, you know, like, this stuff is just, it's still happening, and that's what just scares me and upsets me and shakes me to my core, that I can sit here and talk until my face is blue, but he's still there, you know.
May I ask you how old are you now?
I'm 21.
21?
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
If there are no other questions, if people want to do one-on-ones, maybe just sort of line up and talk to me and I'll slot you.
Can I ask one last question?
You want to ask it one-on-one
this is
with
for everybody.
somebody?
In an ideal world, if this complaint was taken on by the ICC, and if they found against the Vatican, what in the name of goodness could they actually do to the Vatican, according to you? How could they actually What sanctions
It's
would
not
they take
the
against the Vatican?
it's not the Vatican. It's the individuals. It's the International Criminal Court with individual
what
criminal
sanctions would they take
responsibility.
against the individuals then?
If you're saying if they went through trial and were found guilty, then they would be sentenced, and the court would fashion a sentence as appropriate.
Which could be?
Well,
I mean, Benedict can get 10 to 15 years. Bertoni 5 to 10.
we don't have
what are we
sentencing guidelines in the same way we do in our national system, so that would be, for the court to determine.
What we really, really hope is that maybe the Vatican officials would be shaken and maybe start changing their policies and start protecting children instead of waiting for us to keep bringing more and more evidence.
But we're talking about mass crimes. I know we don't think about it. When we think of that, we think about, Sarajevo, and we think about conflict situations. But when you consider, like I said, the level of harm and the scale and magnitude that just of what we know is immense, and what we don't know is probably the bottom, 2/3 of the iceberg, and it's astonishing, and there needs to be accountability.
It doesn't stop. I mean, think about just the individuals here. My perpetrator had been reported before he got to me, and I know of several girls who were abused after I reported him. We know about Megan's perpetrator. We know there's 3 or 4 victims in Minnesota alone, not to mention if there's any more today in India. We know Rita spoke, and those priests acknowledged 7 Filipino priests raped her as a teenager in Los Angeles, and they were not punished. And Cardinal Mahoney knew it and allowed them to be transferred. So look at the number of children who were abused by Father Liefeld. I mean, we're talking about huge numbers of lives that are just devastated. And look at the families. The families of each of our families has suffered because of what the priest did to us. And our parish communities, the minute one of us speaks up, what happens in the parish? A division. You have the parishioners who want to say, oh, Father Warren would never do such a thing. And then you have those who say, oh, we have to stop Father Warren. And all along, what happens is Vatican officials keep quiet and just allow this to continue. And we are only like a small number. In our organization alone, we have over 12,000 members. We sit with the victims in these support group meetings and the family members, and it's heartbreaking. I just sat with a mother whose 32-year-old son committed suicide because of the pain of this abuse and the depression that he suffered. He leaves behind 3 young children. He leaves a devastated mother who is saying, I had no idea. I invited the priest to our home. I allowed him to come for dinner. We thought it was an honor that the priest came to our home. I had no idea he was raping my son. And this mother has lost that son today. And it's been very recent. He just committed suicide this past October. It hasn't even been a year yet. And she comes to our meeting looking for help and healing from us as survivors. No church official has reached out to her or her family, and they acknowledge that, yes, they do believe the boy was abused by the priest. And that's the extent of it. The devastation and the harm is so devastating, it needs to stop. And the vast majority of the victims here in Italy can't even feel that it's safe to come forward. And you heard Leva explain some of the situations. We've heard from many victims who are too frightened and fearful to come out in this environment. And we say it's time to have the Pope and the Vatican officials say, we will embrace victims. We love victims. We celebrate. And one day, when history looks back at this moment, instead of viewing us as enemies of the church, they will recognize that we bring a gift because we are exposing an evil that needs to be eradicated from our church.
Just a point of reference, in the complaint, Barbara referred to the bishop's knowledge about the priests who abused Rita. There are letters in the set of exhibits that you can refer to, which show the diocesan officials instructing the priests to stay out of the jurisdiction because there could be legal trouble if they come back. So those are some of the documents that we've included, so you can review that correspondence for yourself. And again, that's dated, and it doesn't fit within the jurisdiction, but it goes to show the systematic quality of how this plays out. And when you multiply that times all the other instances of pre-shifting that we've also highlighted in the complaint, you'll get a sense.
I mean, it's
of
interesting
this.
that, because we've heard this a lot, your point that you were making. And it's like, the facts are there. No one's arguing it's not happening. It's like no one's arguing that there isn't this cover-up. It's amazing. So what's the problem? But and that is a victory to survivors that we have gotten to the point. I can remember not too long ago, a year and a half ago, it's the problem in the United States. Okay? No one is ever, and I remember being here in Rome, being able to say, now no one will ever be able to say that again. And they're not saying it again. But if you know a crime's been committed, and you know it's been covered up, and you know that there's a policy of an institution that has facilitated and allowed it, and no one's arguing with us on this, because all those facts have been established. And you're saying, but justice can't happen. Why? Why can't it happen? Why? And what is it saying to the world? That justice cannot happen. Do you need an ideal world when this priest who raped this girl over here is sitting now, like with the girls' choir in India right now, and she's got to come here and drag herself here? Did you hear her words? Shaken to the core. What are we here doing this for? So that is simply unacceptable. And the Pope, or Sedano, or Bertoni, all these people you mentioned, could stop that right now, today. And all those children are on their consciences, in their heads. Every single one that's going to be raped by this priest. And I can guarantee you he's going to do it again. He's probably doing it right now as we're sitting in this room having this theoretical discussion. It is unacceptable. If we can make the case, justice in some form has to be served.
Thanks, everybody.
This looks like yours, Mark.
Thanks.
Got notes in there.
Yeah.
We don't have to. There might be a meeting with the survivors later.